Hey guys, this is Meeker here, back with another video. This is probably going to be the last one on sort of PvP guides for a little bit, because I imagine that when the PTR stuff comes out tomorrow, there'll be a lot of testing, and then I'll be putting out like kind of meta stuff in terms of where I think meta will shift and what you should be looking out for in terms of gear. But this one is going to be specifically tailored to how to tick a point and what up companies are doing now on their ticking points and like how that should be improved in my opinion and the mistakes that people are making. So in terms of point, every point functions fairly similarly. I think this partially depends if you're an NA or EU. EU is starting to adapt for this. For once, it almost feels like NA is ahead of the meta compared to EU, and I think it's partially because NA has better dex players, and actually utilizes their dex squads a lot more. And NA, what I have in the top left, is a very typical setup. Uh, the group 3 being point is not necessarily standard, but a lot of people will put 3 people on the point, but call one of those groups not a point group. They call it a ball group, but they'll still have them on the point. So I would still consider that to be a point group, even though it's a group that is formatted like a ball group, if that makes sense. Like they'll still have the great axes, they'll still have the IGVG, they'll still have an IGBB, more of a like kill oriented IGBB if they're running that, or they'll have some sort of combination of like kind of ball setup. And the ball group is pretty normal, and what I have for specialists is often referred to as kill squads, but they also would not just call it a kill squad group completely because you have group 10, which usually is dex on both NA and EU, consisting of muskets and bows, which is not really the same as Group 9, which is usually a combination of ranged decks and melees, is what people will have it for. And that's like sort of a backline group. And Group 8 is sort of like a optional group that some people have where it's just like kind of a melee kill squad. It's meant for diving backlines. Some people opt to not run like that Group 8 a Group 9, Group 10 setup, instead slot like more IGBBs in their ball, so they still have that peel aspect, but they'll just integrate it in the rest of their army. But at the end of the day, the numbers are still pretty similar. But that doesn't necessarily pertain exactly to how this point actually starts ticking. Uh, I would say there's a couple different stages when you're coming to point. There's I was trying to make a circle for a while, so okay, that's done. That's too small. We'll go up to the small circle. All right. So there's like kind of a pre uh commit stage where you're just kind of poking around, and this is a spot, or actually let me start off with what's currently happening. So there is a sort of a like a point team on command that happens right now with most people. So that's where you have these group 1 through group 3 go on the point. So I'll just draw that in here. Group 1, and then they're actually, let's not do group 1, we'll just say 1, 2, 3, and you want them ideally to be kind of spaced apart so that they're not clumped, so people are just not instantly dying. This is what people usually default to. Uh, the difference of like where I think from a shot caller perspective comes from and from a player perspective comes from, and then is in a lot of newer companies when people say like point team needs to be on point or deadly team needs to be on point, or like your tanks need to be on point, they assume that you need to be on point all the time. What I would argue is when people call for this, you want to be on point for I'd say 70 to 80% of the time. It's not on point all the time. Like if you see that there is a wave of red like crashing in on you, you probably don't want to be in front of that, and you want to get off the point for a second. And then when they come back, when this red team gets on the point, then you want to kind of come back in. And the reason why you want to do that is so that you avoid dying, and then you hit the red team when they don't have cooldowns, and you still keep your cooldowns because you weren't in the path of them when they actually crashed onto you. So a lot of this is just about kind of kiting pressure and playing the ebb and flow, as they like to talk or like to call it. But if there are people coming to you and they are scarier than you generally don't want to be there. The whole point of this like point team on, when this is like very early tick, like I would say 0 to maybe 50% tick, usually a little bit less than this, is just like to force the defenders to have to respond. You're not actually trying to do anything with this other than get the defenders to ball up on the point. Where some people get confused is where they see like the defenders all get on the point, and then your point team stays there and it gets wiped, and your point team's like, well, no one helped us. I would argue that's the point team's fault at this point. people should be good enough at the game at this point where they see red people trying to swarm in on them, they want to get off the point as quickly as possible. But the other part of this is they need to have space around the point for them to actually get off, which is a problem that you see on fort phase particularly, where some people will have point group first go to point and then other groups get in. But then if the red team, like if you say that this area down here is the initial B choke, if the red team's able to control this space, then there's going to be reds coming in from both sides, and there's nowhere for the point team really to go, so the point team just dies in this sort of situation a lot, which has been fixed by this like kind of keep a dex group back here, because in this group and this choke doesn't really exist since they just get forced out by ranged poke. But that's like one of the issues that you have with this like kind of point team on phase. That's like very common, where people will just get surrounded, they'll hard commit to the point and get off. What I would just say is you want to dump your abilities on point. You ideally want to be on the point, but oftentimes the safest areas of point are on the sides, and then also on the center of point is weirdly safe pretty often. You're looking to play in your allied sacreds, but it's really hard to tell where allied sacreds are at this point in the war, because there's usually more defenders on than actual deadly people on when you're just going for the early point tick. Oftentimes, I like to break this rule of like 70 to 80%, because this tick is not very consequential, and if I see a clump that is, say, like I have a bunch of blues over here and a bunch of reds over here and they're fighting, I will leave point and go help this clump, because this is more important to me getting that long-term tick than it is for the short term, and that short-term tick doesn't really yield anything. So if I play for that long run, then I'm inherently just going to get more value. Like, if I'm sitting on point alone, it's gonna take me, like, 2 to 3 minutes to take that point. If I'm off point for a little bit, it does not really impact that very much. This is very different from later on, where later on, when you're at, like, 75 to 100% tick, you really want your daddy point team on, and that's why they're like that's where they earn their money there, or like why they get slotted. It's for that 75 to 100% tick and how much they can do during that, and how much they can do when everyone's all in. Is like that's where your daddy team earns their bread and butter, and that's where you see if those like weird experimental builds that people are playing like VGBB or SNS actually yield a lot of value, or if they just fall over and die when everyone actually commits to them and they're just trying to play a build that gets like more value in the short term. Like if a medium Great Axe Warhammer is on Deady Point, but they die consistently when people crash on them, they're not a Deady Point player in my opinion. That's where I would separate that into that's like a ball player who's being slotted on a Deady Point but is not playing how a Deady Point should because they're not able to live. And that living part is not easy, and this is that part I'm talking about now. It's from a top level perspective, it is as simple as if there are more scary people around you, you don't want to be there. Actually telling where you need to play in the stage is really hard, but I don't want to talk about the micro in this video of in terms of like where you should be positioning. But just know that when this kind of people are on stage, like people will say that everyone should be on, and shot callers will call that. You generally want your team to be on, and that's why shot callers have to call that because they can't call for the exceptions. But if you are really good at your build, you should know that you should not have to be on at this entire time. And there are better things to do than just being AFK on the point. You want to focus your damage on those clumps if you're like a IG, if you're a VGBB build, or if you have a BB that has some damage, you want to focus your damage on top of healers. You want to avoid shooting people if you have a BB with refreshing ward. If you're a Great Axe Warhammer, you're just looking to basically make it so that there's no safe spot for the enemy to play on point without getting stunned from your Warhammer. And the rest of it is sort of extra. So that's like the first stage I'll talk about there. The second stage that is very common in current wars is like this kind of I'd say 25 to 75% where you have your entire army kind of wrapping around the point, and you have like if you're on the blue side, like you'll have people over here, you have people over here, you have people back here, and you're trying to push into their space, and just because your team is pushing into their space, you tend to get more people on the point, and then this tends to get contested more. So when you say control like this much of point, this is like usually when this happens where you're kind of really ticking here and you're kind of pushing your army's momentum forward. This naturally happens over time. Again, this does not happen because your dead team was on point early. Happens because your ball team gets kills. But if your dead team gets on point early, it forces people to group up on the point, and then your ball kills those people who are grouped up on deady. That's where stuff starts to sync really well, and you start to see things where people are capping points outside very, very quickly. And that's like where another spot where the deady team earns their bread and butter. And when I say daddy, I mean dedicated point. That's the same thing as the point team that I say up here. So usually in this like 25 to 75% stage is where people in the point team should be on point and where people on the ball team should be on point. You don't want other like specialist people on point. You want your specialist people kind of around the point at this point when you're 25 to 75%. I'd say mostly in your backline, but starting to push into the enemy space where it gets exciting. And the current way of people play point is like this 75 to Mm, I'd say 85%, and then there's, like, another spot after this where it's, like, 85 to 100%. The difference between these 2 is basically who commits. And this one, you'll have, point, ball, and melee specialist commit, and this one, it's an all-in. Generally, the team that commits last in these point phases usually wins, and you'll see that with a lot of the best companies. It's like, oh, they got that company to 99%, and then they lost. The reason why the other team let you get to 99% is they know if they could commit later, and they could actually and actually have the numbers to cancel out that tick, that your entire army will just be balled up on point here. Like if I have a blue team and I'm just in this circle, and then the red team and I have this circle, if the red team is able to prevent this point from capping, the red team's going to kill the blue team given time if the blue team all ins, which is why this all in call is really important to happen like very, very late and not early. And if you get baited into all inning early and then your healers die, it's a very easy way to lose a lot of wars. Uh, so at this like this is just off of conventional like stuff that's happening right now, but this 75 to 85%, you really want to be careful. Like who you're committing. Like I would even say melee kill, like specialist or melee kill squad. Like you want to be careful committing with that. If you're light IGBB, you want to be careful committing with that. You're not really trying to force the point tick where you're at 75 to 85%. That's where you already have pressure and you're ticking, but you're trying to kill the healers while the other team, has to commit to point because you're 75 to 85%. So this is like where you bait the other team to get on the point, and that's where you kind of take advantage of people and you kill people that are healing them. You annoy the healers so that the people on point don't have sacreds and they start dying. It's like where you start to get a lot of value from a melee kill squad perspective because they're actually able to move up from this like backline position and push into the other team's backline and look to trade backlines. And the reason why you're able to trade backlines is because the red team has to commit to point because again you're 75 to 80% ticked. So that's where you want your kill squad to be in their backline as much as possible. Your kill squad can go in their backline earlier, but it's like risky and you need to have space control for that to happen. If you have space control and no tick, that's perfectly fine and that's a good circumstance for kill squad to go in their backline. But if you don't have space control and your kill squad's going into their backline and you don't have point tick, your kill squad's just going to get farmed because there's no other thing for anyone else in the red team's army to do. So they'll just hit the people in the kill squad. That's a mistake I see a lot of people making. In 85 to 100% tick, this is just an all-in. It's not much more complicated than that. If you have an alt, you usually want to save it for around this 85% threshold and then dump it there. You basically want to try to hold your alt until people commit. Like you still want to use your alt for good value, but if you were in a position where you're trying to hold an alt as long as possible, you'd want to dump it around this 85% mark and try to make a difference before your team dies and while their team is committed on the point. So this is what I would like call kind of conventional strategy. It's basically tick the point, stay on the point if you're a daddy group. If you're a ball group, work your way around the point. You don't really need to stay on, it's fine. And then later on, you want to hard commit. In EU, this differs a lot. In EU, the point team is pretty much the only team that actually gets on the point. The ball team is always controlling space around the point. And then the specialist team, which is usually one squad, is more of a backline protector and not really a harasser. So what happens is the ball team controls space around the point, but none of the enemy healers usually die. They just basically end up playing like really far off, but they could still peel the point because they have LOS. So it's not as effective as an NA. And the main reason why this is because EU people tend to slot melees in these groups, and melees inherently struggle versus light players because they're not able to chase them unless they have some sort of haste aspect or some sort of like reaching aspect. Like if you're playing a one build that's popular in NA, sorry, it's a little cold in here. One build that's popular in NA is a Great Sword Great Axe. And the reason why that's popular is it's actually able to chase down these specialist roles. And it's able to kill healers very, very well and apply pressure really well, and also live very, very well. But it's not popular in EU because Great Sword Hatchet's able to control that space better, but the other side of the coin is Greatsword Hatchet really struggles at getting kills versus that other build actually lends to getting kills. Greatsword Hatchet's a really good initiator, but it's not a really good finisher, and EU doesn't slot a lot of finisher builds, which I think is a mistake. Those finisher builds tend to be best as range builds, but can be light melee as well if the light melee is good enough. And that's one difference I see a lot between the regions. So going into what I think this should kind of change to, I really shouldn't drink water before this. Oh well. 0 to, I'd say like 0 to 25%. This is just your point team, and they're like soft on. So this is like, you don't want anyone to commit. You want your team to be more or less evenly spread around point. Maybe focusing one side if your army's on that side. But all you want your point team to do here is try to help the clump, but also try to stay on point as much as possible, versus just trying to stay on point at all times. You want your point team chasing clumps like a ball group, but prioritizing being on the point. So where a ball group would say be on the point here like 25% of the time, your point group should be on the point here like 75% of the time. And that's what I would call the difference between these two groups, is the amount of time that you're actually on point, but it's not necessarily that you have to strictly be on point. It's just that you want to be, as a default, you want to be defaulting to being on point, but then you have exceptions that will make it so that you don't want to play on point when those conditionals happen. Versus on ball, you're conditionally off a point and holding space, but then there's exceptions where you'll be on point. Like if there's nothing happening as a ball group and there's no space that really needs to be controlled, then like yeah, just go on the point and take it. But it might be better for a ball group in that circumstance to push up and prevent the respawns from coming in cleanly. So that's where it kind of differs there. So 0 to 25%, I'd say, is that like first window. This like 25 to 75% window is where the other team is going to start kind of coming into point as much as possible to try to de-tick this. I would argue this is where you actually want to anchor your team back towards the edge of your point. So you would want your 1, 2, and 3 kind of playing in the backside. Maybe like one group that is playing up when they have their cooldowns, and you kind of rotate around here. Like I'm kind of picturing what do you call it? I'm picturing like kind of Rocket League, where if you watch competitive Rocket League, Rocket League, if you guys don't know, is like a really popular car esport game where it's basically like soccer, but it's like 3v3. And what a lot of people in Rocket League do is they'll have an attacker who then rotates to a defender, and they do this in order to get the power up boost, which will enable them to go back in. You can think of those power up boosts as your cooldowns. Once you have your cooldowns, you want to go in, but when you don't have your cooldowns, you want to cycle out and play more conservative. That's what I would argue should happen here in this 25 to 75%. You're looking to get in, but then when you don't have your cooldowns, hey, you just want to chill and you want to hold that space. You want to take that space, so you want to dive in and then you want to hold the line. Dive in and then hold the line. You don't really want to back up, but if you have to back up in this stage, it's okay. But you are just trying to pry out your life and actually apply pressure. And that's what 1, 2, and 3 should be doing. They should be trying to like stop this dive from happening, but not really hard commit. Like drop an ice shower here, but then back up. You're just looking to prevent that tick from completely going away. Meanwhile, your ball groups should be looking to start diving into the other team's space while this happens, and then go for the healers. Your specialist groups, I would argue in this spot, are either soft protecting your ball groups, or they're taking a wider angle than your ball groups and going for healers. Or sorry, they're not soft protecting your ball groups. They're soft protecting your point groups and pressuring the people that the point groups are like walling off, or they're kind of wrapping around and trying to kill healers. The main emphasis here is you want to be prowling, going for healers almost all the time, because if you are on their healer, then their melee has to peel for their healer, and then their melee has to get off the point. Versus if you're on the melee, then the healer just heals the melee. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for a ball group to go on the melees unless it's a really easy, like kind of combo wipe situation where you say have an ultimate. If you have an ultimate like Stone Form, then I think you should go for the clump. But if you don't have an ultimate and you don't have your cooldowns, then I don't think it makes sense. And I think you should generally be trying to dump your cooldowns on top of healers. There will be exceptions to this, of course, where some players will try to prowl going for the ball group on the other team, and that's perfectly okay, but you want your general army to be trying to zone their healers, and when those healers get zoned, then this army gets weaker, and when you're in a spot where you say have red people on this half a point, but then you have blue people who are surrounding on their half of the point, and they're holding this like backline space over here, then these groups that are up here crash in behind and pinch while your point group walks up. These red people get pincered, their healers are zoned, and that's where people start dying. and that's how you start winning. And that like 25 to 75% tick is like the most important part for that. I would say it's like what happens after this, like what we normally do is like pretty accurate, but I think that early part of the fort is generally wrong. And you need to be focusing healers during that early part, and it doesn't make sense to pro point until it's above 75% tick. When you're at 75% tick, you can go from 75 to 100 very, very quickly if no one's on the point. So at 75%, I would say you want your melee and your IG VG on. You want your IGBB flanking, and like trying to take a wide angle. And your IGVG should be taking a wide angle before this. So what I mean by this is if say the blue team is capping point here and it's not prowling point as much, and you're the red team and you're trying to retake. So say blue team has control of all this space and you're red team and you have a little bit of space control but not much. You should be trying to wrap around them and then going for behind. And at this point, if you're at 75%, you're past the point where you could like afford the time to peel for healers, and you need to just start trading backline. Once you get to and you need to be basically this 50 to 75% as a defender. You need to be trying to trade that back line, and then you need to start crashing into the actual point when you get to about the 75%. And you want to hit them from behind so that they can't back up, drop your ice walls, have your ball push in, and that's where you attempt to de-tick them. But it often becomes a point of who is trading backlines faster, and that's the company that generally wins this. On defenders and fort, it's a lot easier to trade the offenders backlines, and you see people jump down, trying to make plays on healers, force healers to not be able to heal the army, and then the army just folds. As an attacker, if you're a healer, you want to be prepared for what this crash is happening and be in a spot where it's very hard to get to you. So if I'm 25% ticked as a healer, I'm trying to get up top. I'm trying to get like on wood, uh, or like dirt, basically. You're trying to zone yourself away from where people want to be so that you're safer when this crash actually happens, but not so far off that you get picked off by decks. It's not very easy. A lot of the time you need army to help with the space control. So if you're playing like on B, that's a spot where army could be very easily help with the space control, but it's not super easy to actually do. But yeah, that's the base idea of what you want to do from like that as a from a retaking perspective. And then like but in general, when you get to the 75%, no matter like what side you're on, this is like an all in with quotes. So basically, if you can afford being on the point, you should be getting on the point. You want to get on the point together, though. This is like where you have your melees versus melees, your IGVG versus IGVG, and then you basically are optimizing for every single role. So if you're a role that can play on point, you should be on point. If you're a role that if you're on point for longer than 5 seconds and you will die, you should not be on point. When you get to 90 to 95%, I think this is an all in, like a hard all in, and you literally have everyone just go on the point. At this point, if you're a defender, you're hoping for respawn advantage, basically to catch up and for you to win, or some sort of miracle. And then from an offense perspective, you just want to secure the victory. So this is where you just, if you're a healer or a dex player, you pop your ult, get on the point, press all the cooldown buttons that you have that will keep you alive, spam your iframes, and then hope for the best. From a steady point perspective, this is where if I'm at 90%, I'm looking to blast shot people off of the point, which sounds comical until you play against a guy that runs blast shot, and then you'll realize how many people you actually knock off the point and how often that actually leads to victories. If you're running clear out, this is a time for you to clear out people on point. I don't imagine many of you guys are watching this and got this far in this video if you're running clear out, but that's like the idea, right? You want to force people off a point as much as possible. So that means you're trying to put your damage on the edge of clump more towards than the center, because the squishy people will be on the edge of the clump, and consequently, often the safest spot during this part is actually on the center of the point. So if you're on the center facing out, this is where you tend to be safer at 90%, because the squishier people will be on the outside, and you just want to knock the squishier people off the point so you can D-tick. Most of the sacreds will also be concentrated on the center of point, so you'll be having AoE heals. You want to try to pre-apply your buffs when this happens, pop your regen, not your health, but pop your cleanse, pop your oak, pop your dust, and then just kind of all in at this point, and you're just trying to hit the people on the outside of point, and you're trying to focus the squishy people that are all inning, and the squishy people should all in, so that you're in a spot where you could actually like get this final 10%, because a squishy person usually can live for 5 to 10 seconds on point if they just time their iframes and their abilities well. So they'll be able to live long enough to get to this 100%. But if you're on a normal group team and you're focusing people when they go to all in on the edge of point, then you could sometimes prevent this from happening. The key being, if you're the person to hard commit last, you're going to be the person that's not on the inside of this like outer ring, and then you'll be able to more easily kill the people that are on the outside because they committed first. Usually the point stalls when you're at 90%, and you have like 10 to 15 seconds, I'd say, before you win or lose. So this is like where your bread and butter of like who commits last, how could you get on to people. Like you should never commit a 95%, but you should be looking to commit 80 to 90%, I would say. And then like anything past this, the war is won. So yeah, that's what I have to say. I think this applies to like every region of fort. If you're in fort, there's obviously spots like as a healer on attack, you're not going to be able to take a lot of angles to actually heal the point, but you still can get up top. If you're a defender, you can get up top. And you could play on wood if you're a defender. You could play on wood if you're on offense. You could play on dirt if you're on defense or offense. But often the safest spot for healers on attack is B gate, which should be protected by decks at this point if you've been following any of these meta things. I would still say protecting B with one group of decks is still generally best, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a dex group. This could be any kind of specialist group that just prevents people from dropping down and basically makes it so they die. I've seen people like put muskets on B, and then the muskets will just snipe the healers who are healing people in LOS of B choke. And that works really well too. You don't necessarily need to be able to hit the healers, but you need to be able to pump damage. And Dex is generally the best role at doing this because it can't easily be contested from drop downs. But that's not saying that Dex have to do it. You can get away with putting IGBBs there in light. You can get away with putting IGBBs there in heavy, even because it could CC and slow people down enough for people to be able to live. But you need some group to be able to protect that B choke for healers because there's not really another easy spot for healers to play unless you clear a zone first, like top uh or wood. Basically, I'd say dirt is like a last second maneuver. But if you clear top or like the wood rampart area, then you'll be able to live from a healer perspective, and that should generally be priority before you all in on a point. But if you are going to all in on a point, what I said earlier is like what I would generally recommend. The main thing that people need to change is this like 0 to 75% area. This is the main spot that I think people are messing up a lot right now. But the 75% and above area, people are doing generally a good job, but people should not be dying in the 0 to 75% area. You should just be focusing on zone control, playing for kills, playing like the Europeans like to play. And once you get out of that 75-ish area, which I would use as a trigger mark, because once you get to 75, you can cap the point in under 10 seconds if no one contests it. So you kind of have to make a move. Your hand's forced, if you will. So that's when you actually want to look to commit. Even if you're like a ball player, if you're 50% tick and it's ticking fast and you're trying to contest a 75% tick, then like you need to be wary of that, and vice versa. You need to be wary of when you're getting close at 75% tick so you can make a play. Use that like point control to actually be able to make plays, force people to be on point who don't want to be on point, and then take advantage of it is the base idea behind all this. So that's it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. OPR should be out tomorrow. Did I say OPR? Uh, PTR will be out tomorrow, so they call it OPR in Overwatch for the pro stuff. But yeah, and I'll go over some of the changes for that if I have time to get around to it. Otherwise, that video will be a little bit delayed as I test stuff because I get home from work roughly an hour before this video will go out, or 2 hours before this video will go out. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me know what you guys think, and check out the Discord if you haven't already. I'll see you guys later.